I found a secret room in my new house and I'm terrified. I swung the sledgehammer into the drywall with as much force as my shoulders could muster and the impact sent a cloud of white dust billowing into the humid basement air. I coughed and waved my hand in front of my face to clear the debris because I wanted to see what was behind the hollow sound I had discovered earlier that morning. I had been renovating this Victorian property for 3 months and every corner seemed to hide a new expense, but this time I found something that did not cost money but rather cost me my sanity. Reddit stories. I found a secret room in my new house and I'm terrified is the only way I can describe the cold dread that washed over me when the dust settled and revealed a dark opening that was definitely not on the blueprints. I squeezed through the jagged hole in the drywall and clicked on my heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut through the stale air and illuminated a space no larger than a prison cell. There were no windows and no ventilation shafts. The only furniture was a heavy wooden desk and a single wooden chair that looked like it had been bolted to the floor. I walked toward the desk and my boots crunched on what looked like decades of dead insects. On the desk sat a massive book bound in black leather that looked remarkably well preserved compared to the rest of the room. I reached out and touched the cover. It was cold. I opened it to a random page near the middle and saw the date June 12, 2015 printed at the top in elegant typewriter font. That was the day I graduated from high school. I began to read the text and my stomach dropped. It described the exact conversation I had with my mother that morning about my tie being crooked. It described the burnt taste of the toast I forced down. It described the knot of anxiety in my chest that I had never told anyone about. The writing was clinical and detached. It referred to me as the subject. I flipped forward to the day I met my wife Sarah. The book detailed the coffee shop where we met and it transcribed our dialogue word for word. It even described the thoughts running through my head as I looked at her, which is something no surveillance device could ever capture. This author knew my internal monologue. I felt like I was going to be sick. I urge you to listen closely because this could happen to anyone. Subscribe for more shocking Reddit stories if you want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. I flipped toward the end of the book and the pages became crisp and new. I found today's date. It described me waking up. It described the sledgehammer. Then I saw a sentence that made me freeze. It said the subject finds the control room and discovers the casting files. I looked up from the book and noticed a file cabinet in the corner that I had missed before. I rushed over to it and ripped open the top drawer. Inside were hundreds of manila folders. I pulled the first one out and saw a headshot attached to the front. It was a picture of my best friend Mark, but the name on the resume was not Mark. It was an actor named David Vance. I opened the folder and found an audition tape transcript where he was reading lines for the role of the best friend. Every single person in my life was in this cabinet. My parents. My boss. My neighbors. I was standing in a room full of proof that my entire life was a staged production. I dropped the file on the floor and backed away until my back hit the cold wall of the secret room. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. If Mark was an actor, then every memory I had with him was a lie. The camping trips and the late night talks and the time he helped me move apartments were all paid gigs for him. I looked back at the book on the desk and noticed that new text was appearing on the open page right before my eyes. It was not being written by a pen but rather appearing as if the paper itself was bleeding ink. The fresh text read, "The subject is experiencing a stage 4 panic response and will attempt to exit the set immediately." I stared at the words and felt a surge of defiance. I refused to be a puppet. I grabbed the book and shoved it under my arm before scrambling back out through the hole in the wall. I needed to get out of the house. I ran up the basement stairs, taking them 2 at a time, and burst into the kitchen. My wife Sarah was standing by the sink washing dishes. She looked up at me with a smile that suddenly looked too perfect and too practiced. She asked me what was wrong and her voice sounded exactly like it did in the script I had just read. I did not answer her. I ran past her toward the front door. She called out my name, but the tone changed. It was not the worried voice of a wife but the sharp command of a handler. I reached the front door and twisted the deadbolt, but it would not budge. It felt like it was welded shut. I threw my shoulder against the wood, but it was solid as a rock. The text in the book had predicted this. I ran to the living room window and grabbed a heavy vase from the mantelpiece. I swung it with all my might against the glass pane. I expected the shatter of glass and a rush of fresh air, but instead the vase bounced off with a dull thud. The glass did not even crack. It was reinforced polycarbonate. I was trapped in a fishbowl. I looked around the living room and for the first time I really saw it. The lighting was too strategic. The furniture arrangement was perfect for camera angles. I spotted a tiny black dot in the smoke detector that I had always assumed was a sensor. It was a lens. I looked at Sarah, who had followed me into the living room. She was not looking at me. She was looking past me at a spot on the wall, and she tapped her ear as if she was listening to an earpiece. She said into the air that the subject is becoming non-compliant and requested an intervention. My blood ran cold. She was communicating with the production team. I backed away from her and she dropped the act completely. Her face went blank and she sighed with annoyance. She told me to calm down and that I was ruining the season finale. She spoke to me like I was a misbehaving child rather than her husband of 5 years. I realized then that the woman I loved did not exist. She was just a character played by an employee who wanted to go home. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway above the living room. The book in my hands felt heavier as I looked down at the page and read the line, "The director enters to reset the narrative." The lights in the house suddenly cut out and plunged us into total darkness. A single spotlight clicked on from the ceiling and illuminated the center of the living room. The footsteps grew louder and the main door at the top of the stairs unlocked with a loud mechanical clank that reverberated through the floorboards. A tall man in a sharp gray suit walked in. He held a clipboard and looked at me with an expression of mild disappointment. This was the man the book called the director. I screamed at him and asked who he was and why he was doing this to me. He did not answer immediately. He simply gestured to Sarah and she walked over to stand beside him. She took off her wedding ring and dropped it into his outstretched hand. The director finally spoke and his voice was smooth and terrifyingly calm. He told me that I was the star of the most popular reality show in history. He explained that the world outside had become boring and predictable, so they created a controlled environment to nurture genuine human emotion. He said my pain and my joy and my fear were the only real things left in society. I told him I quit. I told him I was leaving. The director laughed, and it was a dry sound devoid of humor. He told me that I could not quit because I was not an employee. I was a proprietary asset. He pointed to the book I was still clutching. He said that the book was not just a record of the past but a contract for the future. He told me that twist number 1 was finding out my wife was an actor, but twist number 2 was far worse. He signaled to the ceiling and a large screen descended from the darkness. It flickered to life and showed a live feed of thousands of people watching me right now. They were cheering. They were betting on whether I would cry or fight. The director looked me in the eye and said that the season was ending today. He gave me a choice. I could walk out the front door into a world that I did not know and would likely not survive because I had no immunity to the outside viruses and no legal identity. Or I could agree to a memory wipe and start season 32 with a new storyline and a new wife. He said they had already cast a blonde for the next season because the audience wanted a change. I looked at Sarah and she was checking her watch. She did not care. Nobody cared. The realization hit me that my entire consciousness was their playground. I was property. The footsteps I had heard earlier were not just the director but a security team that now stepped out of the shadows. They were holding syringes. I gripped the book until my knuckles turned white. The choice between a fake life and a likely death was the cruelest thing they could offer. I looked at the security team and then back at the director. I realized that if I fought them I would lose. They had written this outcome too. The book probably said the subject attempts to resist and is sedated. I decided to do the one thing the script could not predict. I decided to comply, but with a condition. I told the director I would agree to the memory wipe in the new season, but only if I could keep one memory. I wanted to remember that the room existed. I told him that if he let me keep the knowledge of the room I would give him the best performance of his career. The director paused. He seemed intrigued by the offer. It would add a layer of psychological complexity to the show that the audience would love. He nodded slowly and agreed. He signaled the medical team to lower their weapons. I walked toward them and sat in the chair they provided. As the needle approached my arm I looked directly into the camera lens hidden in the smoke detector. I wanted the audience to see my eyes. I wanted them to know that I knew. The darkness took me shortly after that. I woke up this morning in a different house with a different color of paint on the walls. A blonde woman named Jessica made me coffee and kissed me on the cheek. She told me we had been married for 2 years. I smiled at her and told her I loved her. It was a perfect line delivery. But later when she went to work I went straight to the basement. I did not need to find a hollow wall this time because I knew exactly what I was looking for. I found the loose brick behind the water heater and pulled it out. Inside was a single page I had torn from the book before they sedated me. It was the page that listed the cast members. I know who they are now. I know Jessica is an actor. I know my boss is an actor. I am playing my role perfectly so they do not suspect anything. I am the perfect husband and the perfect employee. But every night while Jessica sleeps I am mapping out the blind spots in the cameras. I am learning the shift changes of the security team. I am not just a character in their show anymore. I am the writer of the finale, and this time the season is going to end with the set burning to the ground. I found a secret room in my new house and I am terrified, but they should be terrified of me. Let me know in the comments if you would choose the blue pill or the red pill. This is my story for now, but the cameras are watching so I have to go.